What is happening with Aave right now? The token is down almost 10% in 24 hours. I'm going to explain exactly what just happened and why this news matters, what the long-term impact could be, and a lot more. We're also going to talk about Aster, Polymarket, and Polygon, so there's a lot to cover today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Crypto Red, the crypto news channel. Let's start with the market. Bitcoin is sitting around $68,000, Ethereum around $2,000, down about 3.5%. So overall, the market is clearly under pressure right now, and part of that is the geopolitical backdrop. Donald Trump is once again threatening Iran. The deadline is supposed to be tonight, and honestly, some of the language being used is pretty grim. He's talking about an entire civilization potentially dying tonight. That is the context around the ultimatum being given to Iran. The message is basically if they do not reach an agreement, there could be strikes or destruction of key targets as soon as tonight. So naturally, markets are nervous. There is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, and by tomorrow, we'll know whether this gets extended again, whether things escalate for real in the next few hours. Now, let's get to Aave. Aave is down almost 10% in 24 hours. And the first thing to understand is that this is not just a random red candle. There is a real underlying story here. More broadly, the price of Aave has already been falling hard for a while now. If you zoom out, the token is down massively from the height we saw a few months ago. And when I say a few months ago, it really wasn't that long ago. We're talking about August 2025, so not even a full year ago. Since then, it has basically been a constant decline. The token has been under pressure for months, and that pressure has accelerated because of everything that has come out over the past several weeks and several months. I've talked about this many times. We've already seen key contributors in the Aave ecosystem announce that they are leaving. I'm talking about very important players in the development and growth of Aave, including the Aave Chain Initiative and BGD Labs. These are not minor contributors. These are teams that played a major role in helping the protocol grow. And now we have yet another major entity announcing that it is leaving Aave. This time we're talking about Chaos Labs. Chaos Labs was the risk manager for Aave, one of the two risk managers of Aave. From what we understand, they were not happy with where Aave was going. They have announced a lot of stuff. They have announced that they're leaving and that they are the one who decided to leave, not that they were pushed out. They decided on their own to leave Aave, and yes, this is worrying, especially when you combine it with everything that already happened with BGD Labs and the other contributors who left before them. Chaos Labs published a very long article explaining their side of the story, and then on the other side you also have the version from Stanny, the founder of Aave Labs, and that version is different. So what I want to do here is to look at both sides and base the analysis on the official statements, not just rumors, not just headlines, not just quick reactions on social media. Let's analyze the real articles. Let's start with the version from Chaos Labs. Chaos Labs said that they had been working on Aave for a very long time, basically since November 2022, across Aave V2, Aave V3. They were there while Aave grew from around $5 billion in TVL to $26 billion in TVL. So this is not some outside firm that showed up 6 months ago. They have been deeply involved for a long time. Of course, that growth was not only because of them. I've already said that there are other teams behind the growth of Aave. But Chaos Labs was clearly one of the core contributors. They also explained that when they first arrived, the Aave DAO was not really making money. It was losing money. Over time, that changed, of course. The DAO is now highly profitable. We all know that Aave now generates a lot of revenue. And Chaos Lab basically said they are leaving for three main reasons. The first reason is that the other key contributors have already left the ship. And when teams like BGD Labs leave, that means more work falls onto the remaining teams, including Chaos Labs. So their workload increased. The second reason is the arrival of V4. Chaos Labs was already working on V3, and now V4 is here as well. It is live. There is not much money deposited into V4 yet, somewhere around $10 million. It's still, V4 is a separate instance of Aave that needs to be managed. It has its own parameters. It has to be monitored. The risk needs to be tracked. The settings needs to be adjusted. So it adds a lot more work on top of the V3 workload. And according to Chaos Labs, the real issue is that they did not design V4 themselves. They were not the ones behind the architecture. They changed. There are a lot of change. So now they are being asked to help manage a system they did not build and that they apparently have concerns about. The third reason is financial. Chaos Labs says that over the past 3 years, they were losing money working with Aave. In their version, the budget they were receiving was simply not enough. They said they were getting about $2.5 million and that they were still losing money. So even an increase of around $1 million in their view was not enough to cover the actual cost of the work. That is why they say they decided to walk away. And not only that, they say they walked away from a potential $5 million a year. Aave apparently offered them $5 million and they still said no. I explain in a minute why that was still enough for them and what they were actually asking for. Chaos Labs also said they were involved in updating around 2,000 parameters on Aave, and that matters because Aave is not a simple protocol. There are constant changes that have to be made to manage risk correctly. You have to monitor collateral, you have to adjust parameters, you have to make sure ratios are appropriate, you have to watch many different moving parts at the same time. That is where the role of the risk manager is absolutely critical on a protocol like Aave. For people who follow Morpho, I would say it's a bit like the curators there. It's not exactly the same thing, but it gives you an idea of how important the role is. Chaos Labs also said they were doing more than just pure risk management. They were also helping Aave on the business side, helping it attract institutions, helping develop commercial relationships, and according to them, they were not really being compensated for that part either. And then they used a very interesting metaphor for V4, Aave V4. They said, imagine you have a ship, and little by little you replace every single plank of wood on that ship. Every board gets changed, every structural piece gets changed, and at the end the ship still has the same name, but in reality it's no longer the same ship. And that, according to them, is what V4 is. They are basically saying V4 is no longer Aave, it is something fundamentally different, so they are clearly trying to raise concern and put major warnings around V4. Now, to be fair, some of their criticism is also about the fact that V4 has not been sufficiently tested yet, but of course that is partly normal because it has barely launched. It has been audited many times, but it's still new. And I'm just focusing here on their arguments as they presented it. And overall, the message from Chaos Labs is they are not comfortable with some of the decisions that were made with V4. Now let's get to the financial disagreements. According to Chaos Labs, they wanted $8 million a year. Aave offered $5 million. So Aave basically doubled the budget and Chaos Labs still refused. Then Chaos Labs criticized that amount and said that compared with banks, it was still too low. Their argument was basically look at how much large financial institutions spend on risk management and compliance. And according to them, Aave should have been willing to pay way more part of the revenue, like 6 to 10% of the revenue, that should be more than $10 million that should be paid to Chaos Labs. So in the end, they are basically saying goodbye to $5 million per year and they are walking away. Then Stanis, the head of Aave Labs, responded publicly. He thanked Chaos Labs for the work they have done over the years, but he also said there were important details that had to be clarified. First, he confirmed that Aave had offered $5 million per year, which he presented as roughly doubling the previous budget, but he said Chaos Labs wanted $8 million, and more importantly, they wanted certain concessions that Aave Labs was absolutely not willing to give. And for me, this is the most worrying part of the whole discussions comes in. According to Stanis, Chaos Labs wanted to replace Chainlink oracles with Chaos Labs' own oracle for future deployments. And that is a major issue, and I agree with Stani here, especially because there was already a recent incident involving one of Chaos Labs' oracles. If you remember the roughly $21 million of Aave liquidation that happened by mistake, that was tied to a Chaos Labs oracle issue. So the idea that they wanted to use their own oracles everywhere going forward is a very big ask. On top of that, Stanis said Chaos Labs wanted to use Chaos Labs' own vault exclusively for all future business-to-business deployments, and Aave Labs basically said, no, we are not agreeing to that. They also said that during all the discussions around V4 before launch, Chaos Labs never raised this concern in the way they are raising them now publicly. In other words, Aave Labs is implying that this public criticism is coming late after the facts. Aave Labs also pointed out that Aave has always functioned with two risk managers. They said the other one, Llama Risk, is still there and still working on the project. And for now, according to them, the rest of the risk workload will be covered internally by Aave Labs itself. So that is the response, and honestly, it's a logical response too. My read is that Chaos Labs wanted a lot more than just a bigger budget. They wanted more control, more integration, more exclusivity, and Aave did not want to give that. And once again, this shows something I've been telling you for a while now. Aave Labs is the real power center here. Aave Labs is the entity that actually decides things. And for me, this is one of the most important points, and one that a lot of press coverage is still not emphasizing enough. This discussion did not really happen in governance forums. They did not happen through clean on-chain votes shaping the future of the protocol. They happened off-chain, between people, in private discussions. And those off-chain discussions are what actually shape the future of Aave. Because at the end of the day, everybody already knows that if Stanis and Aave Labs do not agree with something, it's not going to happen. If they do not agree with doubling a budget or changing a strategic direction or accepting certain demands, then the proposal is dead. So what is governance even doing at that point? What are the votes really for? And that is the issue. For me, the large structural decisions are not being made by the DAO, they are being made by Aave Labs. So when people still talk about Aave like it's some deeply decentralized autonomous structure, I really think that it's becoming harder and harder to defend. In practice, the DAO has very little power. Yes, it accumulates value, it accumulates profits, it collects money, but the actual control looks concentrated elsewhere. And if that is true, then over time, Aave Labs become the center of gravity, the main decision maker, the entity that can direct where value flows, where influence flows, and eventually where a good part of the treasury value gets captured. That is one of the things that has worried me about Aave for a while, and I've said it repeatedly. Now, going back specifically to Chaos Labs, yes, this is still a very important team to lose. What worries me in the short term is that Chaos Labs had a massive amount of historical knowledge about Aave v3. They knew the system, they knew the parameters, they knew the habits, they knew the history, and now a lot of responsibility is going to shift to Llama Risk and to Aave Labs internally, and that is a lot. Managing v3 is already serious work. Managing v4 on top of that is even more work. Taking over the gap left by Chaos Labs add even more pressure. So the real question is, are the remaining teams actually staffed and equipped to handle all of this at the level of rigor that Aave needs? Because now we are starting to see real reason to worry about the future of Aave risk management. Do they still have ultra competent people at the control to manage parameter changes correctly? To react to market shifts, to calibrate collateral risk, to handle the complexity of the system? When Chaos Labs was there, when BGD was there, when those teams were in place, when ACI was in place, people felt reassured. You had several very strong teams around the table. Now that number of small teams competent is getting smaller. And if Llama Risk were to leave too, and Aave Labs end up being the only entity fully in control from top to bottom, that will be a lot more worrying. So yes, this is my view on what just happened. I do think this is another blow for Aave. Now, obviously, the people who are strong defenders of Aave and especially strong defender of Stani, the founder, will say that in reality, not much changes. The argument will be, look, we've known for weeks, 7 months, that Aave Labs is the one steering the ship anyway. Aave Labs already decides everything. So if you trust Stani, if you trust Aave Labs, then you can keep trusting them and move on. And yes, this is one possible position. But once again, we are entering a world of trust. Personally, I would rather have multiple highly competent teams balancing each other than one internal team handling everything. This is just my preference. I prefer distributed competence over centralized trust. But at the same time, everybody has the same information now, so everybody has the same cards in hand, and it's up to each person to decide what they want to do from here. Do they want to hold? Do they want to sell? Do they want to rotate into other protocols? And that brings me to Morpho. I don't know if you realize how crazy that is. Morpho, which is a protocol like Aave, but it was way smaller. It's still smaller in TVL, but now Morpho has an FDV of around $1.6 billion, which is actually higher than the FDV, the fully diluted valuation of Aave. Yes, Aave still has a higher market cap, but Morpho's FDV is higher. And that is honestly pretty shocking when you think about it, because the difference in TVL and market position between the two protocols is huge. So either Morpho is overvalued or Aave is undervalued, or the market is pricing in a future where Morpho ends up being worth more than Aave in the long run. And just stop for a second and think about how wild that is. Morpho originally came in as a kind of layer on top of Aave, a superstructure around the original protocol, like an add-on. And now the market is looking at Morpho's token and saying that this thing deserve higher fully diluted valuation than the original project it grew around. That is pretty incredible. So yes, this is a huge subject. There's a lot more that could be said about Aave, about governance, about risk management, about protocol capture, about valuation. I love all of these DeFi topics, especially when they touch yield, architecture, incentives, and power structure inside protocols. Now let's move on to Aster. A lot of people have been asking me about Aster lately. You know, these hyperliquid competitors with the major backers behind it. You have CZ behind it, the founder of Binance. Well, Aster has just announced a partnership with USD1. USD1, the stablecoin of World Liberty Financial, is going to become the stablecoin used for the entire RWA side of Aster. That means Aster is planning to launch RWA perpetual contracts, similar to what Hyperliquid did with HIP3, where you can trade things like gold, silver, oil, and other real world assets. And apparently, all of that on Aster will be denominated in USD1. So clearly, there is some kind of agreement here, some kind of partnerships, probably some economic alignment as well. We don't know every detail, so I don't want to invent things that haven't been disclosed. But one thing is obvious: you do not build this kind of integration for no reason. And this actually is part of a larger trend. Hyperliquid, for example, has wanted over time to push more towards its own stablecoin strategy too, because stablecoin captures a lot of value. And in the next HIP4 markets, the default stablecoin will be the USDH, Hyperliquid stablecoin. A stablecoin generates money, and that money usually does not go back to the app that it is generating the usage. So naturally, more and more apps want their own stablecoin because they want to capture part of that value. And that takes us to Polymarket. Polymarket has announced a major change coming over the next few weeks to its trading engine. And on top of that, they also announced a native stablecoin. They are launching their own stablecoin, the Polymarket USD. And that makes total sense because Polymarket have close to $1 billion in stablecoin deposited in Polymarket, sitting in contracts. That capital could generate meaningful yield. We could be talking about something like $50 million a year in annualized revenue potentially. So of course they want to internalize part of that value instead of letting it leak away to third-party stablecoins. So in that sense, I think it's a smart move from Polymarket. And you know what? Polymarket is built on Polygon, which brings us to the last topic. Polygon has announced the hard fork, and that is supposed to happen tomorrow. They're calling it the Giuliano hard fork. The goal is to improve finality, in other words, to reduce the amount of time it takes for a transaction to become final and irreversible. So in paper, that is a good thing, and to be fair, this kind of improvement has been part of Polygon's broader roadmap for a while. They have a pretty ambitious roadmap around improving performance, increasing throughput, and making the chain more efficient, and that part is good. But at the same time, Polygon has had a rough period lately. There have been some bugs, the token has been under pressure, and the Katana chain they launched, this DeFi-oriented chain, has not really performed that well. We're talking about an FDV of around $100 million, roughly 10% of Polygon's own FDV. So no, it's not a huge success story at this stage. It's not some breakout hit. Polygon is clearly trying to reinvent itself, but right now it feels like they're struggling a bit. So that is what I wanted to cover with you across the main crypto stories. We talked about Aave and why this new departure matters. We talked about the growing concentration around the Aave Labs. We talked about Morpho, Aster, Polymarket, Polygon. There is a lot happening right now, and in markets like this, the details really matter. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow for the next one. Bye-bye.